Hello, I'm Alexander Dietz. I'm a lecturer in philosophy at Cardiff University, and this is going to be a talk based on my paper, Pattern-Based Reasons and Disaster. So I'll start by telling you what I mean by pattern-based reasons. So a pattern-based reason, as I'm using the term, is a reason for action based on features of the patterns in which one would or could be participating. That contrasts with an act-based reason, which is a reason for action based on features of the action itself taken separately. This is a distinction that comes from Christopher Woodard. To give you an example of what this means, consider the case of voting. Now, one kind of reason for voting is that there might be at least some chance that your vote will make a difference to who wins the election. That would be an act-based reason, because it's a reason based on the possible consequences of your vote. But you might also think that even if we set aside the chance that your vote will end up influencing the election, you might still have at least some reason to vote just based on the fact that you would be participating in a beneficial pattern of action, namely the pattern in which many people vote for the better candidate, let's say. You have some reason just to do your part in a beneficial or valuable pattern. Now, for those who find the idea of pattern-based reasons compelling, there are a couple of questions that we might naturally be led to ask. One question is whether we have reasons to participate in merely hypothetical patterns or only in actual patterns. So suppose that the better candidate is not going to win the election. Do you nevertheless still have some reason to do your part in the hypothetical pattern where the majority does vote for the better candidate? Or because it's merely a hypothetical pattern, does that mean that you don't have any reason to do your part? A second question is how we should measure the weight of our pattern-based reasons. Even if you accept that we have some reason to do our part, how are we going to decide how important that reason is compared to other reasons for action that we might have? Now, in the past, Christopher Woodard, who coined this distinction between pattern and act-based reasons, has defended the idea of hypothetical pattern-based reasons. In other words, he's defended the idea that you do have some reason to do your part, even in patterns that are merely hypothetical and that aren't actually going to be realized. Now, in previous work, I have argued that when combined with a natural hypothesis about the weight of pattern-based reasons, hypothetical pattern-based reasons can imply that agents ought to act in ways that lead to disaster. And in fact, in Woodard's new book, Taking Utilitarianism Seriously, which I highly recommend, Woodard reports that he was convinced by this argument and now thinks that we should only focus on actual pattern-based reasons, not hypothetical pattern-based reasons. In this paper, however, I present a problem for that response. The problem is that the kind of challenge that I presented in my earlier work is not actually limited to hypothetical pattern-based reasons. In fact, there is an analogous challenge for actual pattern-based reasons. The other thesis that I defend in the paper is that the most promising response to this challenge is to revise our theory of the weight of pattern-based reasons. And I defend a particular revision that we should adopt. In this talk, I'm going to be focusing on the first thesis. So the plan is I'm just going to be reviewing the previous argument I made about hypothetical pattern-based reasons, and then I'll be presenting the analogous argument about actual pattern-based reasons. So I'll be arguing that the problem is not limited to merely hypothetical patterns. Okay, let's start by reviewing my earlier argument about the disastrous implications of hypothetical pattern-based reasons. So my argument started from a view about the weight of pattern-based reasons, which we can call the proportionality hypothesis. Proportionality hypothesis says that the weight of one's reasons to participate or to not participate in some pattern is proportional to the value or disvalue of the pattern, other things equal. In other words, the proportionality hypothesis says that the better the pattern, the more valuable the pattern, the weightier your reasons to do your part in that pattern. And the worse the pattern, the more disvaluable it is, the weightier are your reasons not to participate in that pattern. So you have really strong reasons to participate in really good patterns. You have really strong reasons to resist participating in really bad patterns. So I think that this is a pretty plausible initial view that we might have. It also explains our intuitions about particular examples. For example, plausibly, it's important to avoid contributing to climate change. It's not so important to avoid contributing to the production of uninspired shows on Netflix. Why is it that your reason not to do your part in this bad pattern is so much stronger in one case than in the other? Well, plausibly, that's because the pattern where we all cause climate change is a very disvaluable pattern. It's a very bad pattern. Whereas the pattern where we all cause the production of bad Netflix shows is not as bad. And so your reasons to avoid doing your part in the two patterns correspond to the relative importance of the patterns. Okay. The next step in the argument is the following observation. Sometimes a hypothetical pattern would be good, but doing your part alone would be very bad. A classic example of this would be the case of unilateral disarmament. Let's say it would be great if all countries in the world got rid of their nuclear weapons, but if North Korea isn't going to get rid of its nuclear weapons, it would be really bad for the United States to unilaterally get rid of its nuclear weapons and let North Korea take over the world. I think the intuition that we have in these cases is that you should not do your part. And this problem has manifested in the literature on real consequentialism in the form of what's sometimes called the ideal world objection. Real consequentialism is telling us you should do your part in the rules that would be best if everybody followed them, even if it's true that in the actual world where we know that a lot of people are not going to follow these rules, your unilaterally following them could be disastrous. So we think intuitively you should not do your part in that kind of case. Now, if we accept the idea of hypothetical pattern-based reasons, we'll have to accept that you have at least some reason to do your part in the good hypothetical pattern. Now, so far, that is okay. That's because we can still say that you have an act-based reason not to do your part, since that action would lead to bad consequences. The problem is this. If the hypothetical pattern would be extremely good, then the proportionality hypothesis is going to tell us that your pattern-based reason could well be weighty enough to outweigh your act-based reason. Again, the proportionality hypothesis said the more valuable the pattern, the weightier your reason to participate. If we have a case where this hypothetical pattern would be extremely good, then the proportionality hypothesis is going to tell us that your pattern-based reason is going to be very, very weighty. And so it could well be weighty enough to outweigh the act-based reason that you have not to do your part. And in that case, we would be forced to conclude that you should do your part. Now, again, my earlier argument was presented just in the context of discussing hypothetical pattern-based reasons. In response to that discussion, Woodard concluded that we should get rid of hypothetical pattern-based reasons, just focus on actual pattern-based reasons. What I'm going to argue next, however, is that we can generate analogous problems even if we limit ourselves to actual pattern-based reasons. Now, so far, we've been looking at cases in which a hypothetical pattern would be good, but doing your part would be very bad. But it's also possible that an actual pattern would be good, but doing your part in that pattern would be very bad. In addition, it's possible that an actual pattern would be bad, but doing your part would be very good. This is a pretty simple observation, but it leads to problems. Now, suppose that we accept both actual pattern-based reasons and the proportionality hypothesis. If so, we can see that when an actual pattern is extremely good, then you may have decisive pattern-based reasons to participate, even if your participation would be very bad. Likewise, when an actual pattern is extremely bad, then the proportionality hypothesis is going to imply that you may have decisive pattern-based reasons not to participate, even if your participation would be very good. To show how this works, I'm going to be focusing on an example of the latter kind, so a really bad actual pattern in which your participation would nevertheless be very good. So consider the following case. A villain is planning to inject two groups of innocent victims with a lethal drug. One group contains a very large number of victims. The other group contains 100 victims. You could administer a second drug to both groups. If you did that, there would be two effects. First, the members of the very large group would simply die from the combined effects of the two drugs. But the 100 victim group would be saved. So again, if you participate in this pattern where you both inject these drugs, the very large group is going to die no matter what, but the 100 victim group will be saved. Now, my intuition is that you should administer the drug, since this would save 100 lives, and it would make no one worse off. Again, the very large group is going to die no matter what. The problem is that if we accept both actual pattern-based reasons and the proportionality hypothesis, then we're going to have trouble vindicating this intuition. So to see this, consider that, well, on the one hand, you would have act-based reason to administer the drug, since doing so would save 100 lives. Your action would save all these lives. But you would also have a pattern-based reason not to take part in the actual pattern which would kill the very large group. So we can see that the administration of both of these drugs counts as a pattern that would be really, really bad. It would cause the death of this very large group of people. And so you have a pattern-based reason not to participate in this bad actual pattern. Moreover, because the pattern would kill so many people, is such a large group of people, the proportionality hypothesis implies that your pattern-based reason could well be weighty enough to outweigh the act-based reason that you have to do what would save 100 lives. Again, I haven't told you how many people are in the very large group. We can make it as large as we like, so that the proportionality hypothesis will force us to the conclusion that your pattern-based reason is going to be much weightier than your act-based reason. In that case, we will be forced to conclude that you should not administer the drug, which is the wrong conclusion. Okay. So to conclude, I've suggested that accepting reasons to participate in merely hypothetical patterns can lead to disaster. That's a familiar point from the literature on real consequentialism. But I've also argued that the problem is not limited to hypothetical patterns. We can get the same problems if we accept reasons to participate in actual patterns. In the paper, I consider a number of responses that we might pursue to this challenge. The best response, I argue, is to revise our theory of the weight of pattern-based reasons. So we should qualify the proportionality hypothesis with the claim that sufficiently weighty act-based reasons trump pattern-based reasons. On this view, I argue, we'll be able to preserve both actual and hypothetical pattern-based reasons while avoiding these disastrous implications. If you're interested in reading a draft of the paper, you're welcome to email me at dietzA4@cardiff.ac.uk. Okay, thank you very much.